Hi guys, this is Rati here. Welcome to my YouTube channel. So today I'm going to talk about how to write a poem. Today's episode is based on how to write a poem. This is the third episode of the How to Write a Poem series, and in this episode I just want to tell you a couple of steps which you can follow when you're writing a poem, especially if you're new to poetry writing. So without much ado, let's just get started. So the first step is that think of a generic subject, a universal topic about which you can write your poem. Now at this stage, this is the first step. At this stage, you don't have to really think about, the specific subject on which to write a poem, but you just have to think about, certain universal topics, generic subjects, make a list of these subjects and then choose one or two subjects on which you want to write your poem. These could be, subjects like love, relationships, dating, or nature, psychology, motivation, even technology, even non-living, inanimate objects, city life, religion, anything. Make a list of these subjects, and then out of these, you could pick one subject on which you want to write your poem. Of course, it could be, a combination of more than one universal subjects as well. So at this point, just choose your generic subject. Step number 2, now from whichever generic subject that you have chosen, now from that, choose the specific idea on which you have to write your poem. Now this is the time to brainstorm that subject and think about the specific idea. So for example, let's say you want to write a poem about love and relationships, right? So now think specifically what kind of a poem you want to write. Do you want it to be descriptive? Do you want it to be philosophical? Do you want it to be like a story about maybe your own experiences in your relationship, in which kind of story in which you invent fictional characters? Or do you just want it to be, abstract kind of a thing? This is the time where your poem actually starts taking shape because you're chiseling your idea. And if you want, you can even write down your idea. So this is the second stage, that you have to think about the specific idea from the list of generic universal subjects you have chosen. Again, to give you one more example. So for example, nature poetry. You want to write nature poetry. So what kind of nature poetry you want to write? Is it a kind of an ode to the mountains? Is it something about, it could even be recount a memory where you're taking a walk amongst the woods and things that you're thinking, things that are going through your mind, your consciousness at that point of a time. So chisel your idea. This is the time to be specific and really think about what you want to write about specifically. Now, the third step is to actually start writing the poem. And I would suggest that for the beginners in the field of poetry writing, it's better to write in free verse. Although there's so many different genres, there's sonnet, there is haiku, so many different genres of poetry writing. But I would suggest you stick to writing in free verse, at least in the beginning. Now, free verse is the kind of writing style in which there is, no restrictions of meter or rhyme. And you can basically pretty much follow your own instincts and develop your own unique writing style. Now, that doesn't mean that, free verse poetry doesn't have any rhythm. On the contrary, most free verse poems do have some kind of a rhythm, and they can be rhyme scheme as well. Most free verse poems do have a certain kind of rhyme scheme, but as I said, it's not a rhyme scheme that is, consciously imposed or technically followed. It's something which, you can invent your own sort of rhyme scheme style. The reason I said especially as a beginner, you can write in free verse. It's better to write in free verse because I think that, it gives you more sort of scope for free flow of ideas. I really believe in the kind of old school that, the first and the most important component of writing poetry is when you're actually sitting down, with a piece of paper and you get those poetic ideas in your head and you actually sort of start surreptitiously putting them down on a piece of paper. I'm still a believer of the old school that poetry cannot be actually written, so consciously. So I think if you get too much into different forms and you study them, then that spontaneous flow of words and creativity might just get hampered. So this is just my suggestion, that you don't have any restrictions, keep any restrictions of form or anything in your mind. You just start writing your poem. Just to give some examples. So, for example, when I started writing poetry, I was not following a rhyme scheme consciously, but still my poems had a certain rhythm. So I'll just give you an example. So this is one of my poems called The Night Never Ceased to Breathe. The night never ceased to breathe, and she never ceased to write narratives of heart painted by the mind. Her pen crawling towards the paper, caressing it with tales untold, silvery kisses of a moonlit terrace, drunken delirium of a sun-kissed beach. The pen danced a tipsy dance, and the words came gushing, random pouring of a summer rain, kissing the paper many a time, breathing ink into his empty heart. So this was just an example. As you saw, a pretty simple poem it is, and it doesn't consistently follow a certain rhyme scheme, but there's still a certain rhythm to it, So I think when you start writing, it's better to write these kind of simpler poems. And as I said, not consistently, not consciously try and adhere to any style. So the third step, write the poem. Once you've written the poem, the next step is to just take a break from that poem, fold that paper and keep the poem far, far away. Now is the time to actually just spend time, a couple of days even, let's say reading poetry. Read a lot of poems, free verse poems especially, since you've written in free verse, and read widely and just, notice the way free verse poems are generally written. Notice the way how some poems have more rhythm than the others. Notice the way, the line breaks are different in different poems. So then you will subconsciously assimilate a lot of these details. And now after a couple of days of reading widely different free verse poems, now the next step is to get back to your own poem. And this is the fifth step. And the final step, we can say, get back to your own poem. And you have to now actually get to the task of editing the poem. Now, editing the poem, guys, is really difficult, and I am the best person to know this, because before I never used to edit my poems. Even when my first book came out, I never really edited my poems, and that is one reason, why I had to literally throw away a lot of my poems. Even only poems which I thought were pretty decent, I used to submit for publication, to magazines and stuff. But then I then learned it the hard way that editing your poems is important. So I would make the same suggestion to you, that before you send your poem out for publication in any magazine or anything, just edit your poem. Now, the best way to do it is to read out your poem loud and see, if there are any words that don't make sense, words that are incongruous. Sometimes what happens is that when we are writing, then just for the sake of it, we are in the flow of the process, we want to complete the poem. So we put verbose. We get really verbose. We put words which don't make any sense really. We just get carried away by our imagination. It happens with me all the time. So just take a look, and the words, which are not right, which have to be replaced by some other words, or which can be just cut out, just ruthlessly edit the extra words, fluff, repetitions, a lot of poems, and that's the, I think, kind of mistake that all poets make. We tend to write a lot of fluff, kind of flowery language, which doesn't have any meaning and which doesn't convey anything to the meaning of the poem. And we are very proud of that sometimes, because as a poet, we also get, passionately attached to our poems. But I think at this point, when you're editing, you have to put your foot down. And as I said, just delete all the unnecessary words. Brevity is the most important component of a poem. The next thing I learned about editing poetry is that, when you try to read your own poem like a story and ask logical questions, why the hell is this there? Why the hell is that there? Then a lot of our poems don't make any sense, and it might be very embarrassing. It might even mean that you have to put entire poems into the basket. But it is very important that, your poems do have some kind of a logical sense. And even if you're using a lot of imagery, even if it's fantastic, then still it has to, fulfill certain minimum requirements of logic. So when you're editing your poem, do ask yourself those questions while reading it aloud, that does this make any sense at all? And if it doesn't make any sense, then try to change the narrative, try to change the poem in a way that it starts making some sense. This is very important, trust me guys. And I learned it the hard way, because I tend to get carried away by my imagination all the time, and sometimes the poems don't really make any sense in a realistic way. So edit your poems, that is the final step. So that is it for today, guys. These other tips I had, these 5 steps you can follow in order to write a poem. I'll see you very soon with next tutorial of this series. Please do like the video and subscribe to the channel if you like my content. Thank you so much for listening.